Welcome back to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and today we're going to talk about narcissism. My conversation partner is Chuck DeGroat. Chuck is a seminary professor, he's a therapist, and he has a book coming out about what happens when narcissism comes to church. Because sadly, narcissism is more common among church leaders than we would like to think. But how do you know if you're in a relationship with a narcissist? I mean, what might that relationship feel like? That's where we're going today. Thanks so much for listening. Okay, I've got Chuck DeGroat on the line. Chuck, it is good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.
Can you say a bit about where you are geographically and just what you're up to these days?
Well, I find myself in Holland, Michigan these days. For the last 5 years, I've been a professor of pastoral care and Christian spirituality at Western Theological Seminary in Holland. But I've worn different hats. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been a pastor for a number of years. I've lived in San Francisco, in Orlando. And so we've kind of been all over, but now we're in this great season of working with and training new pastors. And so it's really fun.
We're going to talk about narcissism today. You're currently doing some work. You've written about narcissism, particularly as it relates to church contexts. And so I want to just have a conversation about, well, the language you use is when narcissism comes to church. Not going to talk about narcissistic personality disorder per se, but we're going to talk about what's it like to be in relationship with someone that has narcissistic tendencies. So maybe to begin with, can you just say a bit about what do we mean when we speak of narcissism?
Yeah, this is a word that we use, right? We use in popular culture. Sometimes we use about political figures, and there's a kind of caricature that comes with it that may be accurate and may at times be inaccurate. I'm kind of developing it out both from kind of the psychological standpoint, using what we call the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Disorder. So like the typical standard psychological definitions that get at grandiosity and a lack of empathy and things like that. But at the core of it, there is this sense of this need to be in power or control and a real defensiveness, like a kind of like the ego defends against any vulnerability. And so one who is narcissistic is one who maybe at some level is incapable of being vulnerable.
You're writing a book about this, and authoring a book is a serious endeavor. It requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of energy. What made you invest so much time and energy? What is presently kind of driving you to invest so much time and energy in writing a book about narcissism in the church?
I think it's mostly because I had people in my ear saying, why don't you write something about this? And I kept saying, no. And they kept saying, why don't you write something about this?
It's incredibly necessary because there's something about leading a family, a church as a family, leading an extended family that is very appealing to people with what we're calling narcissistic draws and narcissistic tendencies. I mean, it's a rush. It fills the ego. You've got a bunch of people every Sunday morning sitting on your every word. Give our listeners a sense of what it might be like to be in relationship with a narcissist. What are some clues that I might be in relationship with someone that is narcissistic? What might that relationship feel like to me?
Yeah, another good question. And I think at the core, I mean, I could go through characteristics or attributes, but I think at the core, you're going to feel small, insignificant. You're going to feel a sense of shame or deficiency. You're going to feel like there's something wrong with you. In large part, that might be a part of your own story, but I think a big part of it is because you're in relationship with someone who is reinforcing that narrative. So instead of being someone who is empowering, encouraging, someone who sees the glory in you, the dignity in you, you've got someone who sees all that's wrong with you. At the core, you will feel small and insignificant. And that's really, I think when I work with people who've been hurt by those on the narcissistic spectrum, that's really the core of their own experience.
A couple decades ago, a man named Scott Peck wrote a book called People of the Lie. And it's his attempt to diagnose the category of evil. I mean, literally, the origin of this book was he presented it to a conference of psychiatrists, and he was making the case, not from a Christian background. He was not a Christian at the time. He was making the case of, look, we all have seen people in our practices with the following criteria, and I would like to propose that we diagnose them as evil. I mean, it's not something to laugh about. Now, narcissism and evil are not identical, but there's a lot of overlap. So I want to share some of Peck's language, and then let's reflect on it together. And this is kind of my tweaking of his words, but it's basically his ideas. And he says that the essential component of narcissism is not the absence of a sense of sin, but the unwillingness to tolerate that sense. Narcissists refuse to suffer the feeling of guilt. They cannot tolerate the painful awareness of their sin. They refuse to suffer the discomfort of significant self-examination. What about that resonates with you?
All of it resonates. I mean, I think when we think of narcissism, we think of the old myth of Narcissist, and that Narcissist sees his reflection in the pool and he's so self-obsessed. And yet I think what that definition gets at is what he's obsessed with is an image. He really is disconnected from his true self. There's an incapacity to see one's core, one's true self. And so really what you're seeing is the mask, the persona, the image that is projected, and not who you really are. So, when I'm working with people who I might consider to be narcissistic, it's really hard to get to the core. It's sort of like you get the stage self, but you can't get behind the curtain.
It's very dangerous because particularly when narcissism comes to church, when you have leaders with narcissistic tendencies that are leading gospel-based churches, they are going to have the language of vulnerability because it's a requirement for their job. But like you said, there's no sense of being able to get behind the mask to the heart.
You and I both have an affection for Dan Ellender's work, and Dan has this category for fools, and then the next category is those who are evil, those who perpetuate evil. And I wrote on this a while back in another book, and I used the word sinister because it really struck me that there's the core of one who's narcissistic is one who's sinister, one who knows how to work the wounds of another human being. They know exactly where the vulnerabilities are, and they prey on those vulnerabilities. And that's what's really dangerous, scary, toxic, and sinister.
I haven't been listening to you for the last two sentences because ever since you said work the wounds, the nausea, right? It's really true. They know how to work the wounds of others. And frankly, they're often pretty good at reading the wounds of others.
They can have an uncanny ability to sort of to understand the unique vulnerabilities, right? And so they have like this psychological acuity to them. Like they've read the books, they know the material, they can use the lingo, and often it's self-defense, right? To protect themselves. It's, oh, no, I'm not narcissistic because I'm this, and this. And yet they don't really know themselves.
And so the way Peck says it is he says they are intolerant to criticism and they will forever deny the existence of any hateful feelings or vengeful motives. Absolutely certain about their own righteousness, they do not question their motives, nor will they allow anyone else to. People with narcissistic tendencies, especially when they are in the church, they are going to have the language of sin. They are going to have the language of course I'm a sinner, but they will forever deny the existence of really darkness in their own hearts because they can't tolerate that truth. If you say to a narcissist, I was hurt when you did X, he or she will not empathize with you. They're unwilling to empathize with the pain of anyone who says, ouch, you hurt me. Now, they will be phenomenally empathetic if you say, someone else in the congregation hurt me. As long as the finger is not pointed at them, they are able to engage oftentimes rather well emotionally with you. and with dexterity. But when you point the finger and say, look, when you did that, that really hurt me, the empathy goes out the window. It is utterly absent. So you've got an article that you wrote called Grace and the Abuse of Grace for Narcissists and Abusers. And in the article, you tell a story about a pastor who, I won't go into all of it, but who is exposed as being abusive. And you're sitting with the pastor, and he has many reasons for his actions. He explains to you, that it's been years since I've had a sabbatical. I'm burned out. I don't have much emotional support from my wife. The elder board was weak and didn't confront me. I mean, the excuses are legion. And you go on to say, this is how you put it. He was quick to say, I failed. And then I love this next sentence, but he never got specific. There is so much to be said in those 5 words, but he never got specific. In my mind, that sentence is core to what it means to be in relationship with a narcissist. They'll say, oh, yes, I'm a sinner. Yes, I'm sure I've failed you. Yes, as a father, I was imperfect. I mean, they are so quick to say those sentences. But if you ask them, can you tell me how you failed me, Dad? They will be unable and unwilling to give any specificity.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment, this idea of not getting specific. I think for me, over the years, in my own counseling practice in particular, I've had to learn the hard way that I've been duped over and over and over again. I think in the early years of doing work with narcissistic men in particular, I heard things like, I'm so sorry, I failed, I could have done better. And I took that as repentant. Mm-hmm. When what we needed to hear was, I saw that vulnerability in my wife that evening, and I took advantage of it.
Yes.
You can stay mostly invulnerable and talk in generalizations. I'm a sinner, I'm bad, I failed. But you move to vulnerability when you say, I can't believe I'm capable of that, but I did that. I manipulated her in that way, or I duped my staff member in that way, or I powered up in this situation, or so very important.
The unwillingness to be specific about how I have done harm is, in my mind, one of the key attributes of narcissistic tendencies. I mean, if I can't say to my wife, I hurt you when I did X on this evening, when I had this look on my face, when you had that expression on your face, and I did this, and of course that crushed you. If I can't be specific like that, that's deeply problematic for the heart.
That you said it well. It's deeply problematic for the heart, and it really shows a lack of heart, an incapacity to be empathetic. I like the work of Brene Brown, and she talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And sympathy is, someone is down in a hole and they're in trouble, and sympathy is, I'm really sorry you're down in the hole. And empathy is getting down in there and saying, what's it like to be here right now? And I think someone who's empathetic is like, how did I hurt you? What did that feel like? Tell me about it. And you're able to stay in the tension of that kind of conversation.
Yes. The sentence, how did it affect you when I did that? Or the sentence, tell me more about the hurt that I caused. Those sentences are not going to be spoken with authenticity, with a genuineness by someone who's narcissistic. Those sentences do not come out of their mouths because they cannot tolerate the answer.
That's exactly it. They cannot tolerate the answer, because if they hear the answer, they've got to deal with themselves. And the narcissist is unwilling to deal with himself. He's in love with the image that's reflected from the pool below.
So as you continue in the article with this pastor, you talk about how his church entered into a hard season of honesty, as well, mindful of its need not just to grieve, but to address what allowed this pastor to slowly spin out of control. And I'm really glad you named that the church played a role, an enabling role, and it always does anytime a pastor falls. So can you say some more, Chuck, about like Diane Langbert says, the system around a narcissist.
Oh, so that's so very important because the grandiose narcissist is going to look for the person who will mirror them or idealize. And in a sense, those who sort of come under the care or leadership of a narcissistic leader or in a narcissistic relationship are happy to do it. That's how I learned a little bit about, because I fell prey to a few narcissistic leaders, including an early boss in my own ministry life.
Yeah, churches, I mean, we just need to name it. Churches are wildly fraught families. And the vast majority of church members are, all of us included, we are trying to right the wrongs from our families of origin. And so the local church becomes family 2.0. And that creates an absolute train wreck. So we can't talk about narcissists in the church without also talking about the family system that surrounds them, i.e. the people in the church who are often all too ready to turn a blind eye, to refuse to confront, to let their fear of speaking lead to cowardice rather than courage. I mean, narcissists need loyal followers in order to stay in leadership, and many of us don't want to do our own work, and a narcissist will allow us to escape a whole lot of hard work, and we can follow him or her.
Well, yeah, that's right. And in a church, it's almost double trouble, because in a family system, in an emotional system, the narcissist has a certain kind of authority. But when he or she has a spiritual authority, well, I can't speak back or talk back to my pastor.
In my opinion, leadership boards of churches are usually in one of two psychological places. They are either in a place of uncritically adoring the head pastor, or they are in a place of absolutely vilifying him or her. And the first almost always leads to the second, because when you adore someone and they let you down, you will turn on them with a vengeance. I want to share an exchange between a mother and her daughter. This is fictionalized, but it's truer than true. It's kind of a compilation of so many stories that I have heard when a woman decides to confront her mom, not even in a big way, but just to sit down and say to mom, it hurt me when you did X. And so I want to share a text exchange, kind of a dialogue between a mother and a daughter and her narcissistic mother. And then let's just talk about, to kind of talk about it. So it's about 6 or 7 lines of dialogue. So the context for this dialogue is that 2 months ago, the daughter wrote a letter to her mother to express some of the ways that she felt wounded by her mom in the past. It was a short letter, but it named a couple of the things, and it said, look, can we talk about this sometime? So here's mom never responds. So the daughter texts mom and says, Mom, it's really hurtful that you still haven't responded to the letter I wrote you 2 months ago. Mom's reply is, I'm sorry, but it wasn't supposed to hurt you. Daughter says, well, I said some really important things in that letter about what it was like for me when I was growing up, about how hard it was for me sometimes to be in relationship with you. And mom's reply is, and I'll stop and we can talk about it. Mom replies this, sorry, but do you know how you are making me feel? Have you once asked me how I am doing after my surgery last week? Do you care that I had to go to the doctor yesterday because I was in so much pain? So just with that, I mean, it's just disorienting, right? What's happening for you, Chuck, as you hear that I've only read 4 lines.
Oh, so much is happening. Mom can't, in a sense, stoop down. Mom is not able to come near, isn't able to empathize and bracket off whatever she's feeling. Maybe she is feeling those things. Maybe it is hard for her that her daughter hasn't called or checked in. But for just a moment to be able to say, thank you. That must have been so hard. Can you tell me what it was like for you to write that letter? were you scared of my response? Were you worried about how I would, what was it like for you when I didn't get back to you right away? I mean, she could have said 100 different things, different than what she said, right?
Right. And so the daughter replies and she says, Mom, I really am sorry that you're in pain, but I need to know what you think about the things I shared with you in my letter. I really poured my heart out in that letter. And mom's response is, I have fully supported you from day one. If you don't know that, then I don't know what to say. You are the one that needs to get past this. This is a two-way street. Your father and I have always loved you. What has stirred up this bitterness all of a sudden? You've never mentioned these things before.
Wow.
Yeah, are you feeling it?
She just turned it all the way back around, right? Well, that's it. That's sort of a textbook narcissistic mom, and that's a whole different there are books written about this. You know this, right? I mean, on narcissistic mothers and daughters. I mean, it's just so painful to hear.
Right. And so there's this core element that is always at play when we're in relationship with a narcissist, and it is the experience of having something turned on us in blame. And so the daughter is laying before her mother a subject, as it were. She's putting it on the coffee table between the two of them. And mom, and this is what narcissists do, is deflecting any spotlight on that subject and is accusing daughter of something else. And the accusations might be spot on, but right now they are serving a function of deflection.
Absolutely.
So the daughter goes on and she says this. She says, I've begun counseling and I'm just starting to realize some of the ways that I felt harmed by you as a girl. Mom says, I've always loved you unconditionally, but somehow my love and support is not enough for what you need. I don't know how to make you feel how much I love you. God calls us to forgive and to be reconciled to one another. God's love can help us work through this.
Oh, self-pity, moralism, spiritual abuse. I mean, all in 2 sentences, right? Yeah, it feels like the elder brother in Luke 15. I've been working my ass off all these years, Dad. Yeah, I've been a good mom. I've done all I can. It's so self-referential, right? And that's all. It always comes back to, I've been working so hard. Look at how I've slaved away all these years.
Right, and it functions to deflect the light away from the concern and the hurt that the other person is bringing. And it's really effective at doing that. But this daughter hangs in there and there's just 2 more lines. And the daughter says, what I really need, Mom, is for you to acknowledge the ways that you hurt me in the past and empathize with why I still have wounds from our relationship. And Mom says, I'm not intentionally trying to upset you or hurt you. And I have never intentionally tried to hurt you. I am trying to help you. Please don't push me away like this.
Once again, so self-protective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the daughter, I mean, I'm just struck by, I heard the words of the daughter more carefully this time, or more closely this time. Like, she's so non-anxious in this conversation.
Right.
The daughter, right? She's just responding back so well, and giving her mother every chance to sort of, I mean, it's beautiful in a sense. It's courageous. It's absolutely vulnerable. But mom moves towards self-protection every time. And she can't bear you said some version of this earlier. She can't bear the darkness in her own being, right? In the relationship in herself.
Yeah. And the other thing to notice is just the mom's commitment to highlight her own goodness. I have always loved you unconditionally.
This idealized self-image, like I can't be anything but good, And if you live out of that, you can't bear your own darkness. And each and every one of us has to come to grips with our own darkness.
Right. And then the end of the text exchange, I mean, it just puts a cherry on top of everything. Please don't push me away like this. So what began as the daughter really inviting closeness with her mom, like talking about their relationship, has become labeled as the daughter pushing this poor mother out and cutting her off.
Wow. You say that, and all I can think, I know we're on a podcast here, and the podcast is about commentary at some level, but I sit with clients, and in times like this, we'll sit in silence for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
There's something deeply painful
Yeah.
about this, such a violation at some level, right? That there's a part of me that just wants to sit in silence for the next 15 minutes to honor this woman's story.
There is a wordlessness to narcissism, to what it's like to be in relationship with a narcissist. There are no words for the anguish. And you and I have both experienced this personally. I mean, nobody gets into talking about this without personal experience. And it's just in preparing for this podcast, it required a lot of me, not intellectually, but emotionally, because it was flat out painful to think about. So I want to transition to talk about one more article that you wrote with a really good title, which was it's Betrayed by Those Who We Thought Got It: Narcissism Among the Enlightened. And in the article, this is what you say. You say, in 25 years of ministry, what I see so often in pastors is a profound lack of healthy self-awareness, what many throughout the centuries have called knowledge of self. And then you go on to say, as my counseling professor in seminary might say, learn to tell your story well and honestly. Can you say more about what did your professor mean when he or she said, learn to tell your story well and honestly? What does that mean to you, Chuck?
So that's very personal to me in this sense. I mean, I was on an academic track in seminary, and I'd come back after a long summer of studying toward getting into a PhD program. But I was exhausted. I was emotionally exhausted. I was anxious. I sat down with my professor of counseling at the seminary. I wasn't in the counseling program at the time, and I essentially said, like, what's wrong with me? Like, give me the magic pill to make this go away. And he looked me in the eye and he said, Chuck, I'm worried about you, and if you go any further towards a PhD or toward the church, you'll be dangerous in both fields. It was earth-shattering, but Gary, in those next months, invited me into an inner conversation. And in my tradition, we call this self-knowledge. This is not. I'm often told that this is just hypertherapeutic, and self-absorbed, but this is deep in the Christian tradition. Chapter 10 of Augustine's Confessions begins with the words in Latin, Noverum me, noverum te, let me know myself, let me know you. This is essentially an autobiographical book of Augustine telling his story. And Gary and Roger and Lottie and all these folks who had studied with Dan Ellender and Larry Crabb over the years, and the coming months and couple of years invited me to look at the various aspects of my own story. As I say in one of the books that I wrote, this metaphor that the poet Robert Bly uses of the long invisible bag we drag behind us. He says the bag is filled with all the essentially the baggage of our lives, everything that we've put in there that we've neglected to look at. And you've just got to sort of take out piece by piece, item by item, and look at it. And, I'm 48 now, and I thought that I'd be kind of there by 40, maybe, like I'd have enough therapy under my belt that I'd completely opened the bag and looked at everything. And I'm still opening that damn bag, and it's our stories are always unfolding before us. But when I think about this, I think about I think about a narrative that spans, from my earliest days of experiencing the love or distance from mom and dad. I think of days early on of feeling bullied or small or just weird. I think of a hard middle school experience. I think of the, intentionally putting on the mask in high school to be the guy that other people wanted me to be. I mean, this is the work of looking at our own lives, looking at our own stories, and all the ways in which we've had to cope with the pain of our lives.
It is hard work, and your professor Gary was really prophetic in saying, if you don't engage this, Chuck, you might do harm. And unlike a narcissist, that sentence penetrated your heart and you adjusted.
Oh, that's good. I think I bawled for 20 minutes first, but
that's precisely what a narcissist will not do. They will not weep over their own darkness in their heart, and frankly, they will not weep over their own wounds.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think, even in writing this book, you always have to come to grips with your own narcissism in one way or another. But I think you're right. I think someone who's diagnosably narcissistic is incapable of that kind of self-evaluation, self-knowledge, and repentance, to use the biblical word, right? That capacity to name what's going on within and to name how it hurts. One of the hardest things for me was connecting the dots around how my way of living impacted my wife.
Yes.
I mean, it's one thing to see how it hurts you, it's another thing to see how I would consider how I treated my wife in the first 5 years, how I interacted with. I would say that I was emotionally abusive in the sense that my words and my actions were crazy making for her. I mean, I was gaslighting her at some level, and so I had to do my own work. And I think you're right. And I don't know your story, but you can't write about this stuff if you don't know some of the dynamics yourself.
Thank you for your honesty there. Thank you for your vulnerability. It's impossible to be a good therapist. It's impossible to engage the darkness in others' hearts if we do not see the ways that we are abusive and the darkness in our own hearts. And, as Christians, we need not fear that reflection. Like, that's the freedom of the gospel, is that we can look at what Jesus sees and we can look at it. It's a stunning sentence, but we can look at it without shame. Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time to reflect with us about narcissism.
Well, thanks a lot. I've learned a ton from you. Just really appreciate what you bring to this, and it's going to help my own research and writing. So grateful to make a friend through this too. So thank you.